Hello everyone, welcome to this Drumcast with Workplace by Facebook. I'm Michael Nutley, I'm a journalist specialising in digital media, and I'm hosting this webcast all about connected companies. To discuss this topic, I'm joined by Ben Gould, Head of the Business Influencer Programme at Facebook.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So this is the second in our series of Drumcasts with Workplace by Facebook, looking at the issues around connected businesses. If you haven't listened to the first discussion, it's still available on the Drum website. It seems to me that one of the paradoxes of our age is that while companies are now much more connected to their customers than ever before, connection within companies themselves lags massively behind. Hardly a day goes past without us hearing about the need to break down silos, to think about the entire customer journey, which is just basically an example of dysfunctional internal communications. Or innovation. We hear about companies moving their innovation units outside of their business, which just seems to beg the question of what's happening to all the ideas that are happening inside. Where are those ideas going? And there are always plenty more examples. Beyond that, and I know this is something you want to pick up on, Ben, we've got a generation coming into the workplace who are used to living in a connected world. Do we expect them to sort of just stop doing that when they come into the office? Before we start digging into some of these issues, I should point out to everybody listening that this isn't a live webcast, so we can't take questions directly. However, anybody who does have a question for Ben, please send them to us at workplacedrumcast@thedrum.com, and we'll pass them on to Ben and get him to answer them. So Ben, maybe you could start off with a bit of context, what Workplace by Facebook is and what your role is there.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the introduction. And Workplace, think of it as a startup within Facebook that has been built on around 15 years of experience and knowledge in building communities for billions of people around the world. One of the great things that Facebook knows so well is how humans interact and how we build relationships and connect with one another. So we decided a few years back to build a platform for the enterprise that is completely secure, that is the data of the company, but one that encompasses a community within the organisation. One where people can come to communicate, two-way, collaborate, innovate, share ideas, and help each other grow within their organisations. And more recently, we're seeing this as a major factor with leaders today in how they show up as leaders running companies and the importance they play in a connected company as well. And so today, what I wanted to talk about is why we think the future belongs to connected companies. And so we've seen quite a dramatic shift in the last 12 months or so from organisations that are moving towards turning teams and departments into communities, but also a stronger way for leadership to create a more authentic way of leadership within their organisations. But before we start looking into the future, I want to take a look at currently the present and how we see at Facebook how organisations and employees within organisations are really shifting what we see as a beginning of a revolution that's changing the way we live, work and relate to one another. Michael, imagine walking into the office on a Monday morning and grabbing your cup of coffee to get settled to start your working week. But today's a little bit different. Your weekly team meeting requires you to wear your virtual reality headset, and as your colleagues from around the UK or even the world connect to an immersive experience bringing everyone together. Emails are a thing of the past. Instead, an app which may provide a daily digest customised for you notifies you on what needs prioritising and mapping out your activities for the week and connecting you to the most important tasks and projects and people in your team. You'd find, Michael, that work life is more organised and with an open and stronger sense of togetherness. The reality is that work is changing. In the world we live in, we know that there is a new generation of employees, millennials, and I think the numbers are roughly by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. And by the way, they've never used email and intranets and notice boards of the past. They'll be in the workforce for the first time and expect to use the same tools at work that they do at home. And so we see that when it comes to communication, they might prefer to look at apps that are a bit more around messaging or a bit more video first. And this is the biggest challenge that workplaces today face, and particularly traditional leaders that run companies. And so there's a change of mindset that companies and leaders today have to have around recruiting the next generation of talent. There's a bigger problem that we're trying to solve though. You might be aware of a recent stat from a Gallup survey that 2 out of every employee feels disengaged and disconnected from their job. Yet take a minute to think about that. We spend around 90,000 hours, so a third of our lives, at work, and yet the overwhelming majority of people will not get anything out of it because they are not engaged with it. Yeah, that is a fundamental problem in business. And it's not for a lack of trying. As an industry, we spend billions of dollars in recruitment, retention, benefits, morale, even more expensive IT tools to get more productivity out of our employees. But there's a bigger problem in making sure that these people feel more connected to their organisations, ones that have a purpose and a mission and a vision that serve them on the front line. We feel at Facebook that business is better when people are connected. And again, in similar research, a year later, the State of the American Workplace, we found that connected companies that follow this type of format and have the ingredients of a connected company are 21% more profitable, 17% more productive, and have around 40% less talent turnover than competitors. So this is an absolute competitor opportunity for you to be ahead of the curve when it comes to those you work alongside. So we can see being connected is not only good for people in your company and the flow of information that will be easier, but it's great for business. But there's one place where the effects of being disconnected are felt 10 times more than anywhere else. And that is on the front lines of your business. And these are the people that will probably never see an office. And one of the major things we're really trying to solve is the fact that frontline employees represent 80% of the world's workforce. And when we talk about bringing community to work, we have to talk about bringing community to them. And we want to understand this in more detail. So we recently carried out some research of our own that we launched in June of this year, and we called it Deskless, Not Voiceless. And we looked at how the frontline workers feel about connection with the rest of the business, and what we found was really, really interesting. We found that 54% of frontline workers feel they don't have a voice in their business. And that's despite the fact that 83% of managers think they're doing a good job in making sure people are heard. Only 14% of them felt connected to their head office and 17% never had spoken to anyone there. So we know it's a problem on the front line, and these are people that represent your mission, the vision and values of your company. However, without a voice, how can they make a meaningful impact at work? We also turned externally to the research that we've been doing, and we looked at what the Business Roundtable in the US, which is a community of around nearly 200 CEOs, and recently they shared that, and issued a statement, in fact, which was what they call the new definition of the purpose of a corporation. And what was interesting out of this particular piece of statement was that dropping the notion that they function first and foremost to serve shareholders and maximise profits is now no longer the priority. They're now focused on serving employees, delivering value to customers, and dealing ethically with suppliers and supporting outside communities that are at the forefront of American business goals. And this isn't just the United States. We're seeing this across Europe, we're seeing it across Asia Pacific, but for a statement of 170 plus CEOs, changing the notion this is no longer a priority is a really big shift into the importance of people within a company.
So what does a connected company look like? What are the characteristics of it? As people, you've talked about connection. What does it actually look like in practice?
The connected company, we feel, is really a new category. We feel that based on the last 3 years of building an enterprise communication and collaboration platform, there's 3 things that need to change. One is mindset. Mindset that leaders today need to challenge the status quo and actually look at ways to create better alignment with the people that serve their company. And there's a few themes that we actually build around this. First, it starts with communities, a place where there is meaningful interaction between teams and departments, breaking down silos and hierarchies, as you mentioned, in favour of closer collaboration and a mission-driven purpose. And particularly with a millennial audience joining the workforce, they're really focused on social impact and social value, and that's going to enable them to retain talent. Secondly, we focus on this culture of openness. Now, what this really refers to is employee communication and how companies align their business, their people strategy, and how to become more agile and responsive. a culture where transparency from the boardroom to the front line is respected and trust is the norm. We also find that engaged leaders is incredibly important as part of building a connected company because for an organisation to really move forward and have two-way collaboration, you need leaders to be really bought in, and that starts with the CEO. What's also really important, and we've noticed recently, engaged leaders are critical to gaining trust from their employees, which also results in a positive impact to that talent retention we touched on. It's a huge opportunity for leaders today to take ownership of inspiring and empowering their workforce. There's no been a better time, in my view, for leaders to really step up and make that change. And then we also see that organisations are really seeking to look into the future in terms of what technology and what innovation is really driving them forward to remain competitive. This is in the area of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. It's also looking at aspects of VR and AR technology as well. And then finally, the main trait and what we see is the centerpiece of a connected company and really the ingredient, and certainly last but not least, is people first. People over pixels we refer to here at Facebook. And that really means that it is your major competitive advantage as an organisation that your people will take your organisation forward. Not necessarily the product, not necessarily the service that you provide, but the talent that you have within your company, which is why hiring and retaining talent is the number one objective for many CEOs that are leading major corporations today.
How much of a difference in all of these, you've talked about leadership, but it seems to me that leadership spreads into all these areas. How big a difference can a leader make?
Leader makes a huge difference to the way that the company shows up. I mean, ultimately their role as a CEO of a company is to identify the mission of the company, the vision, and then partner with their C-suite, the chief HR officer, to define the values of the company and how people should come to work every day. It's incredibly important that leaders lead from the front and take these attributes forward. The opposite is a very defensive environment where people aren't willing to be transparent. And therefore, how are employees able to trust their leaders if they're working in a company that simply blocks the ability to those having a voice? And this is, I guess, the fundamental shift we're seeing is, today over 30,000 organisations that have launched Workplace by Facebook, we've seen as of the first day they've switched on that platform, this dramatic shift in the way that they operate their companies. There's no holding back when you're able to provide two-way feedback to anyone in the company, and that change of culture happens instantly. And in some ways, it's quite an amazing opportunity to see how employees can interact with different people across the business where there's no silos and there's no hierarchies, but a real purpose around taking the company forward.
And do you think this has to come from the top? Does this have to be something that the CEO turns around and says, right, we're going to change? This isn't something that can be built, either from the ground up, like social media usage used to be in organisations. You'd see departments experimenting with it, and then gradually it would gain traction. Does this have to come from the top?
If it's a long-term strategy on being an open and transparent company and really driving towards innovation, it has to start at the top. There is no other choice. A short-term fix is focusing bottom up, but the leader of that company really needs to embrace the ability to hire new generation of talent, be able to communicate the way that the younger audience is seeking to communicate, and that has to be led from the C-suite. And that's, I think, the biggest differentiator between those that decide to take the transformation forward and those that don't.
And what are the barriers that these leaders face? What are the things that so it has to be somebody has to make that decision at the top, but then there'll be problems within the organisation, reluctance to change, as there always is. People saying, no, we can't do it that way for whatever reason. What barriers do people have to overcome?
A number of barriers that people have to overcome, particularly in leadership. Firstly, you would have to say it's around security and privacy. Companies and leaders want to know that the information that people are sharing within their company is private, that it's a private network and that they have access and that they own the data. And so when we work with organisations to define how they launch a platform like Workplace, it's firstly ensuring and making them feel comfortable and confident that the data is theirs and that it is absolutely secure. Enterprise grade data. and that first and foremost, that absolutely anything that is shared is within the four walls of their company. Beyond security and privacy, the next step really comes down to existing systems that they have, whether it's technology that they've had for a long time, legacy systems, or existing software that is a one-stop shop. What we're seeing is leaders in the IT side of things, so the chief information officer at many companies, either being really a supporter in one of two ways, kind of going with the one-stop shop or looking at best-of-breed platforms that are really catered for the best areas to get the most out of the organisation. So there's some of the barriers that we face going into conversations, but generally speaking, I think a lot of leaders today are really open to transforming their cultures, really wanting to hear from the front line and really wanting to hear how they can continue to innovate their businesses through the eyes of the customer who's sharing feedback with that front line every day.
Because I find this fascinating, because most organisations are built on sort of command and control lines, pyramidal structures, decisions are deferred to the next level up, and work their way up to the appropriate decision making level and then cascade down again. What we're seeing, what you're suggesting, is something that's a much flatter structure. So how does a CEO manage when suddenly everybody in the organisation can talk to them? How do you do everything else you've got to do as CEO if your door's open to everyone in the organisation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So structure, first and foremost. You need a plan in terms of launching something like this platform in order to the executive team to understand how exactly they roll something like this out that's going to be meaningful and is also going to impact the way they work in a positive way. The other aspect is you need champions in your business in order to support the growth and transformation of something like this, because you are going from a pyramid structure that you mentioned actually to not what we see as flat. We actually see it as a pyramid upside down in some ways, where the basis of building a community is actually very different to that. Think about what a community makes up of in terms of your local community or your sporting community. It's not hierarchical so much. It's about everyone helping each other out and forming for the same vision or mission. So we're thinking of it not so much as a flat structure, but as a way to really drive better alignment and connection with those in a different way. So champions are important to drive that forward. So giving leadership the confidence in order to make a change at speed. But also the ability to actually identify some of the key return on investment and success metrics that are going to happen as a result of this. So if it's focused on increasing productivity or increasing revenue or staff retention, that those are critical. And then finally, I think with your point around leaders and the CEO being wary or risk adverse to the change of communication in companies, I think what I find working with many CEOs today is actually better understanding the story they're wanting to tell. They lead these companies with a vast amount of experience in not only managing the workforce and the strategy and the vision of the company, but they actually have an amazing story to tell others in their business. And when we've seen CEOs who actually take this leap, and here's an example of how we describe the culture of openness in our very own CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, we do feel that a more open world is a better world because people with information can make better decisions and have greater impact. And he really embraces this philosophy, and we've seen other leaders among those in the Business Roundtable have also taken a similar approach to this. But this is definitely pushing the status quo and pushing the traditional CEO of today.
Going back to what you were saying about structure, how much of this becomes something that you put in place, when you put the systems in place, and how much of it is best done by kind of self-organisation? Because the best communities are obviously self-organising communities.
Yeah, a little bit of so. I think communities in general will always have a chief or a leader that will manage the community and be kind of the go-to. If it's the mayor in your local community or the council, the head of council in your local neighbourhood. But way we see it within companies and how we turn teams and departments into community is a little bit different. So you do need to have a structure and a plan, and identifying the early adopters within the organisation that really feel comfortable with digital and feel comfortable with the transformation it can have on culture, and that generally either comes from kind of the marketing department, the comms department, or the HR department, right? And so this is just another iteration about where teams within the organisation can help identify early adopters and champions to embrace that change. And so, yeah, structure is really important, and that is all done before an organisation essentially hits go. And then once that launch happens, then it enables organisations to then really embrace this idea of crowdsourcing of information, receiving feedback from the front line, and many other examples that many of our great customers have shared.
So when you're starting to think about this stuff, what are the first steps? What do you've sort of identified as sort of a planning phase before hitting go. But what are the key steps that people need to think about?
Yeah, definitely. So first and foremost, identifying your executive sponsor. So we look for a really important leader in the business that is going to sponsor the project. So the CEO in many cases is the leader. We also look for the project team in order to map out a plan on taking work life to workplace and ensuring that there is real value in taking that company into this community environment. We also look at a moment in which they want to announce this to the company, and maybe that's their shareholder meeting, much like Starbucks did 18 months ago. The interesting example there is Steve Johnson got up in front of 4,500 shareholders and launched Workplace by Facebook and shared how they, within 24 hours, changed the product on a menu item in the United States because on the front line, the barista had feedback from the customer and the product marketing team were able to make that change instantly. And so that's really important to have that moment where you can announce it and encourage store managers to really embrace this change. And then we ideally look for support from tech as well. This is a part of it integrated into not only technology, but integrated into the other teams and businesses, whether it's HR and integrating that to how sales and marketing works and customer service. But going back to leaders, I wanted to touch on 5 important things that I coach CEOs and leaders today on around how they show up within their organisations. And I think a local example here that I love is, in fact, the founder of a great UK startup company called Gymshark. And Ben Francis is in his late 20s. Started this with buying a sewing machine and starting to make clothing for athletic wear a few years ago out of his garage. And recently had the opportunity to meet him. And what I thought was really interesting was, he embraces all of these particular themes. Earning trust, the ability to have a close relationship with your customers and with your employees, ability to be authentic. You can see here on his Instagram profile, they're about to launch in the United States. And so instead of putting a job ad up on a job board, he's actually created a really awesome video and posted that to his Instagram community, in which I think this one has 56,000 views, and inspiring people to actually apply to work in the new US office, right? Now, what a great way to connect to the millennial audience of who we talked about earlier. And so not only is this a tactic to recruit and retain top talent, but he's really engaged with his audience. He's very clear on the message he needs to send, and truly an inspiration, I think, to many business owners, not only on a small business stage, but this for me is a good example between a startup founder that is completely aware of how he needs to take the company forward versus a company that's probably more traditional, that's battling with the disruption within their own industry.
Yeah, because I think not only are we talking about a change in the workforce to be more millennial, we're talking about a change in business leaders to be more millennial, and that's that's showing up everywhere you look.
Yeah.
So, who else is doing this well? What other companies do you sort of use as examples, and what are the key lessons that can be taken from them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I mentioned, we've got companies of small, medium and large around the world, within Europe in particular. I love the story from Nestle. 320,000 employees in 140 countries, 4,000 brands. They've launched Workplace to every single employee in their company, wanting to better connect people across departments, across regions. What's also really interesting for them is they want to be able to hear from the front line, from their customers on what it is that they're seeking out of their products and how they can relay that feedback to the product marketing and category marketing teams. Or whether it's Booking.com, with thousands of people around the world that are looking to better connect people regardless of the first language that they speak, and being able to support them as one team in an environment where they feel that their voice can be heard. So we've got a number of organisations doing this at scale in Europe, and then of course in the United States. I've had the pleasure recently of working with the CEO of Delta Airlines, who has been on Workplace as a leader and a champion for some time, but he also recently launched on Instagram. And what was interesting for Ed Bastian launching himself as his own personal brand on Instagram was the ability for him to actually have a better connection with people that fly on his airline on a regular basis. And also what I loved was the recent hurricane in the Bahamas. Within hours of the hurricane being hit, he actually posted about creating a bespoke flight to get down there and help out on the ground. And a combination of not only employees, but regular frequent flyers from Delta who joined to fly down and support the effort down there in the Bahamas. So it's such an interesting, important impact that these leaders are having today. And I think these are great examples of how we see they are embracing connected companies.
Because one of the things you talked about a minute ago was talking about Starbucks and all the shops. You know, I think something that's really interesting is that so many organisations are now relying on different kinds of models. You know, where you've got either very distributed and largely freelance workforce, or you've got a massively franchised model. You know, you've got the communication challenges are very different from what they were, even a generation ago when organisations were quite centralised and you worked for the company. The model as an employee it can be very different, and it seems to me that's creating an environment where this sort of thing becomes particularly powerful.
Yes. Yeah, look, it does, right? And I mean, I think if companies aren't embracing this new way of working, this connected company culture, then I think that it's difficult to remain competitive and retain talent, right? And, we've seen this in tech, even if it's the benefits that companies are offering to employees to retain them through, endorsements to well-being or food at work or more flexible working hours. These are the similar types of themes that companies are able to retain people within their companies because they're thinking about how they're going to keep them for the future. And so I think this is the same with communication. I think those that don't follow how we communicate in our personal lives and the way that we interact with each other, friends and family, whether it's video one-to-one or one-to-many on video chat, we need to bring those type of behaviours into work for us to really be able to connect with the meaningful way that we work and serve the purpose of the company.
So what happens next? What are we looking at in the next beyond this trend? What are we looking at next?
Yeah, definitely. I touched on a little earlier looking into the future, and Facebook is very much focused on what the enterprise opportunity looks like beyond Workplace is just the communications platform and collaboration platform. We see the ability for us to look at VR and AR in business. And recently at our conference in Menlo Park, Maria Fernandez talked about VR at work and the fact that companies around the world like Walmart, Hilton, Johnson & Johnson are already using virtual reality as a way to upskill employees on the job. And so if you can't physically get to all of your employees that are spread out throughout the country or in rural areas, the way to be able to distribute that content in a learning pathway to them in virtual reality is a really scalable way to get them on board. And so we have some really exciting advancements with Oculus for business. And then also most recently we announced Portal also focused on business and what that means for Workplace. And so that is the same way we connect with friends and family on video. Imagine bringing that into work and making it seamless for you on the go using video to connect with people through Portal. So very excited about what the future holds, and that's above and beyond the amazing things that Workplace is doing today.
Great. Ben, I think that's probably all we've got time for. But so thank you so much for talking to us today. Just a reminder, everybody listening, if you have any questions for Ben, email them to the address on screen, workplace drumcast@thedrum.com, and we'll get them to Ben and make sure he answers them. And if you haven't listened to the previous Workplace by Facebook Drumcast in this series, you can find it on the Drum website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.